I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So as usual, Brian Keating, physicist extraordinaire, and I were going to do a podcast about how the universe began. We have a whole series coming out on this show about all the different, Brian almost won the Nobel Prize for this, so he's the expert to talk to it. It was fascinating. But as usual, we started talking about a business idea that we both independently have been researching. And so I think this is a good idea. I'm going to start it, but it's the sort of idea that it doesn't matter how many people start this idea. I love sharing ideas. A, if you can do this better than me, power to you, go for it. But B, this is a huge universe. Just steal my idea. That's the whole purpose of sharing ideas. That's the whole purpose of having ideas. We're going to discuss this business idea. Feel free to steal it, take it, do whatever you want with it, change it, modify it, make it better, enjoy. And this is also shows the process of just riffing on a new idea. Enjoy.
Basically, I'm taking all my podcasts and turning them into a book, and we talked about that. But I was thinking, something that you might be interested, like, why not do that for like all podcasts that have show notes? They can make a book. And we could take all your past podcast episodes, turn it into, a 800-page book or whatever, and then it's on Kindle, and then you could even do audio excerpts from it. But not just do that, but in other words, the meta idea is the company, like you and I just go out and say, look, here's our company. We'll turn every one of your show notes into a Kindle audiobook and printed book on Amazon with your name as first author.
So, okay. So let me play with your idea for a second.
Yeah.
We're just riffing.
Yeah.
So I like the concept of the idea, but like take a podcast like mine that's had about 700 episodes. Mm-hmm. Rule of thumb is every minute is a page. So if I have an hour-long podcast, that's 60 pages. Let's say I've done 1,000 hours. That's 600,000 pages.
Right. Well, no. But the notes are much shorter. Your notes are like half a page on the internet with links to the author's books. Yeah, go on.
Right. So here's what I would do is that, and many podcasts don't have show notes.
Right.
So what we could do is we can basically say to the podcaster, we'll make the show notes. Right. Now, we won't make them specifically, but we would outsource to somebody who would make them. Mm-hmm. And, we would curate that. And then I think the way to approach a podcaster is to say, hey, we're not going to do one book out of all 1,000 of your episodes, but we'll curate and figure, okay, here's a book. Like for you, for instance, think like a Nobel Prize winner. That's 6 of your podcasts. That's a, that itself is a 300 or 400 page book.
Yep.
And we'll curate it. We'll do the audio engineering. We'll make the audio book. We'll make the textbook, the Kindle. We'll upload it to Amazon. We'll be the publishing company, and we'll split 50-50 the revenues.
Yes. Yeah. And you'll be the first author. Whoever, Pat Flynn, you're the first author. I mean, even someone who's really smart, like Eric Weinstein, his audio essays are such brilliant. I actually proposed this to Eric. I said, I want to just take all your 38 show notes, just the audio essays, forget about your guests. Like he talks about racism, he talks about quantum mechanics, he talks about, and just turn it into a book. And I made an outline for him. He's just not taking action on it. But if we say, here's a turnkey system, you'll have a published book.
Right. And it'll cost him nothing. There's no risk. And by the way, maybe there's, you can start off with the first couple of people, they could kill it at the end.
Yes.
And so we take the risk. There's no kill fee. Later on, you could have a kill fee.
Yep.
But so we take the risk of putting in the work. And it's also obviously easy to make a video trailer for the book and do other things. And again, I would curate according to content.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, for me, I have podcasts with 20 sports stars.
Yeah,
I
I
have
was just going to say
podcasts
that.
with 20 comedians. You have the Nobel Prize winners. So we can do some little front work curating. Here's the 10 books we think we could do for you. We'll call you in 3 months and all books will be finished. And you could just say yes, and we'll upload them. And then, it all the money goes into the publishing company, and then we divert it out, split it up. We take the risk on the cost of the podcast notes and the audio engineering and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. No one's doing it. As far as I can tell, nobody's doing it.
The people that are doing the advertising, we could partner with them. In other words, like we could make a totally turnkey service. We'll get you advertisers. We'll get you, for like a bunch of small podcasts. And here's a book that'll come from all your show notes if they exist. Or for the platinum service, we curate, like you're saying. Like some people, you used to do a lot more show notes than you do now. But like your back catalog has enough just pure show notes that for example, or Tim Ferriss or whatever, Pat Flynn. And just, here you go. I just interviewed Evan Carmichael, and it's just the same thing. It's like, little tiny things. He's got billions of show notes. They have anyone who has a mailing list, we could do it for.
And actually, anybody who does, most people don't have show notes.
Right.
We can do those show notes.
Exactly.
And again, that's something that will cost money. We can outsource it, but there's plenty of people out there who do great show notes.
Yeah.
And, for me, I would do my show notes. But, someone like Eric, it's funny because he's a very busy guy, and writing, as you know, takes time and effort.
Yeah.
He pours his creative energy into his work and his podcast, so you can't be creative in every area of life. And Think Like a Billionaire completely came out of my podcast. I don't know the exact numbers because I only published it through Scribd. That was part of the deal. But although now my exclusivity with them is over, so I'm going to publish it on Amazon. But there's so many reasons to do a book, like credibility. Oh, and your point about the advertisers, we could have, the front page of the book, thanks for, American Express, Microsoft, Casper mattresses, Blue Chew pills, whatever, for sponsoring the podcast and this book. Here's one paragraph about each one of them, so they could pay for a lot of the underlying costs of the book if they're on that front page dedication page.
Yeah, exactly. And they get advertising for it. So the turnkey service is what I like about it. And you could have different tiers, like for people that already have, like Eric's got a whole bunch of stuff written, and then it's curating and editing his kind of work. But then, some people, I have a writer who helps me with show notes, but some don't have any, as you're saying. So it's multi-level. If you want show notes only, if you want show notes plus a Kindle book, plus a hardcover, plus an audio book with excerpts. I mean, it could be really big. I just don't know how to nucleate,
Okay, well, let me see. I just, Jay and I were just looking at this, funny enough, for another podcast we're doing, the statistics on audiobooks. Because audiobook, I make more money now on audiobooks from my past books.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of my checks each month from audiobooks, even from books 6-7 years ago, I get more money now from audiobooks than from any other category.
Right.
And I think the percentage of audiobooks read, it doubles each year. I think it was 5% of all books consumed last year, but it's doubling each year. And that's a huge amount. And then we could even find advertisers to be in the audiobooks.
Yeah,
So I think that, and they have all the audio content's done. Now, what's not done, like take example of my podcast, I have a lot of hms and haws. You know, even when we audio engineer, there's occasionally, you know, some stuff that doesn't really need to be in an audiobook. So we would do, you know, more detailed audio editing on the podcast with the cooperation of the podcast, where we might write like intros, or they might want to write an intro and an outro for different chapters to add to the podcast that goes into the audiobook. And then there's the other stuff, which is like cover design, interior design, uploading to all the different platforms. You know, there's a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
There's a lot of aspects, doing a video trailer. There's a lot of aspects of making a book that, you know, doing the editing, you know, because sometimes you can't just take show notes and say that's a chapter. You might have to expand things out.
Yeah,
and,
it's basically
and
like being
do
a
that.
publishing company, you know, but it's multimedia because it's, you know, these high ROI, like you're saying, Kindle and Audible give you much more than the physical book, and they're already in the audio medium, so it's like it makes sense. There is a service that does transcript, and then it can take out ums and ahs, and it actually edits. It's a pretty sophisticated piece of technology.
But I would say that just because I have the one experience I have with exactly this idea is Think Like a Billionaire with Scribd. And so we made the transcript, but then the transcript itself requires heavy editing because the way people talk are different than the way people write. But that's not that hard to do. It's just, it has to be done. So that's a service to provide. And again, the revenue opportunities are, you know, book and audiobook revenues, you split advertising. And the fact that each podcaster it's more than one book. It's each podcaster has anywhere between 10 and 100 books they can write.
Right.
So
it's recurring revenue, like that guy who's gotten 10,000 books on Amazon or whatever. If each one is making $800 a month, I mean, that's a killing. You know, if you woke up tomorrow and your next book was written, but it was written by you. It wasn't ghostwritten. It was your words, your ideas, your thoughts, your questions. Like, I mean, I'd pay a lot for that just to get that out. And maybe I make money from it. Maybe I don't. Oh, by the way, every season you can renew this. Like every year, every calendar year, there's a whole 50 new podcasts or whatever for each author. So it's like recurring revenue, like a book a year. Here's, you know, you don't have to sign exclusive, you could or not, but here's 52 chapters of a book. And every year you'll have a book coming out that will have recurring revenue as an annuity for the rest of your life based on your words. You're the first author, you're the title author.
Right. So, okay. So number one is taking a podcast and making 1 to 1 million books at it. I don't quite like saying taking all of their podcasts and making a book because I think you could curate
100%.
by content.
Yeah. I'm not going to use all of my interviews. I'm going to have themes, like 5 different chapters, like leadership, Nobel Prize, you know, far out ideas, you know, thought
politics.
leaders. Yeah, politics, thought leaders, you know.
And so that's something where the podcaster is technically the author. We provide the service and we split the revenues 50-50. Or actually, maybe you could even get more percentage on our side because we're providing all the service, and they're probably happy just to author a book.
Yeah.
And the percentage they'd get from a publisher is only like 15 to 20%. So you can offer them 30 or 40%. The other idea is doing it for free, which, by the way, they're not going to be against. Like, oh, here's a whole book about my stuff. Like, they'll be happy with that too. And then you get 100% of the revenues, and they're happy because it's another way to spread their message. It's another way to discover them, like through the Amazon search algorithm and so on. Well, the third idea is that newsletters. So the third idea is that if they're going to use it, if they want to say, yeah, I'd love to make a book, but I don't really want to publish it on Amazon. I want to use this as a giveaway to get subscribers. Well, okay, we'll do that for you too, but that we have to charge.
Right.
So that's the third revenue model. And then a fourth is the advertising and, you know, all the ancillary revenues around.
Yeah, we'll just make it turnkey. Here's mid-roll, here's a deal with mid-roll, here's a deal with, you know, whatever. And then mid-roll curates their advertisers, you know, so then American Express. And then we go to American Express. Look, we're getting all these ads placed for free, read by the authors and so forth.
Here's another business model. So take like Pat Flynn as an example. That's an interesting example because that's one where you could curate his episodes, but you don't have to. Every one of his episodes is a new person describing a start from scratch to multi-million-dollar business. So that one you could just say every 15 businesses that are described as a book. So it's, make $1 million business, book one, make $1 million business, book two, and so on. But a lot of those businesses sell products, and you could have, let's say from the ebook,
Yes.
links to all the different products, and you could do affiliate deals with those businesses.
So one of the things you got me thinking about is how to extend my message. Look, I'm not necessarily doing YouTube videos on my channel, Dr. Brian Keating, or Into the Impossible podcast to make money. I mean, I get paid a decent amount by the University of California. I'm a public servant, after all. And but I want my message to get out there. It's similar, and I'm not comparing myself any more than I normally do to Galileo. I mean, he really wanted to get his message out to the world, and the new technology of the printing press was the only way. He couldn't make 1 billion telescopes to give around to every king of Europe or whatever, but he could make books. And those books disseminated his knowledge. And what you told me is like, I have all these show notes and all this information from these one-of-a-kind guests, from Jim Simons, Peter Diamandis, Eric Weinstein, Stephen Wolfram, 6 Nobel Prize winners that they've never given interviews in some cases. And why not capture that in addition to audio to a book? Because for an academic like me, and I assume for business people too, a book is legitimate. Look, your frenemy, Jerry Seinfeld, has a funny line. He's like, a business card is an invitation to someone else to throw away a piece of garbage, right? It really means, here, you throw this away for me, right? I don't know if that made it into his new book, but the point is nobody throws it.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm reading his new book and it's excellent.
I want to read it too, yeah. But nobody throws away a book. I've given away books. I've spoken for free, and I've spoken and given away books, and no one ever throws away the book. They keep it, and they always want it signed. So I thought, why not turn the podcast based on your recommendation into a series of books, one for each season, perhaps, of the Into the Impossible podcast. I've got 100 episodes almost by now, with thought leaders, billionaires, Nobel Prize winners, scientists, ordinary people, et cetera. And so I want to, thank you for that. But I couldn't really figure out how it could turn into a side hustle, how I could actually, again, I'm not hustling necessarily to make a lot of money, but I would love to hustle the ideas, and that idea that you're really planting to make it turnkey. So, well, you gave me the idea to make my own podcast into a book, and my idea sex was like, well, everybody should want to convert their hard-earned many hours of work goes into each podcast. There's a lot of people, if I want to scratch this itch, I'm sure there's a lot of other podcasters that want to scratch it too. So I thought of this idea that we could make basically this turnkey system for turning podcast and the gold in information within them and show notes perhaps into books, audiobooks, and use that to funnel not only perhaps leads for sales or whatever. Again, scientists don't make many sales. We lose on every sale, but we do want to be merchants of ideas and merchants of truth. And this is going to help a lot of scientific podcasters and hopefully a lot of other people out there too.
Yeah, I love this idea. And again, I'm probably one of the few people who's directly taken, a set of podcast episodes, all my interviews with billionaires, and turned it into a paperback, an audiobook, an ebook. And again, that's just on out of 700 episodes I've done, that's only a handful of my episodes. I could curate so I could put out 100 books. And let's just think of a former peer of yours, Isaac Asimov, who was I forgot what school he was technically a professor of his whole life. He was a professor of biology somewhere, and he didn't care at all about it. But the guy wrote 560 books, or he was a co-author. He was an author or co-author on 560 books because he would repurpose content.
Yeah,
he'd write all these articles about, the Big Bang, and then combine them into a book, and that was a book. Like right now, think about it. You and I are doing a book about the beginning of the universe, because we're going to take these podcast episodes and doing that could be a test case. I'm working on an audio book right now with Charlemagne. I have a book coming out with HarperCollins.
Yeah.
Like the new world is all about repurposing content from many formats, but there's no real businesses that cater to that acknowledge that idea that this is a big part of this new world we live, this new media world we live in.
And people
So, yeah.
like to have multiple formats. As you pointed out to me, I was thinking, oh, well, how interesting would it really be to read, just the show notes from my episode? You were like, no, take the audio excerpts of, Jim Simons talking about the one person in human history he'd most like to have dinner with, and put that as an audio excerpt of him speaking in the audiobook. People love that. People would love to have the links. To go and get information. Well, here's this thing that no one's see. The problem with a lot of the ideas we're talking about, the Big Bang and alternatives, is that there are no books about these other things, but there are podcasts, there are scientific papers, there's popularizations. So in the Kindle version, we could have links, hyperlinks to their websites, because most academics don't publish books. I published Losing the Nobel Prize with Norton, and that was a great amount of fun, but a tremendous amount of work. And the thing that academics would worry about, I don't know that most academics would feel comfortable with a ghostwriter writing their book. So our mutual friend, Eric Weinstein, he writes tremendous audio essays, he calls them, before every episode of The Portal. I've said to him, let me turn those into a book. And he's enthusiastic about it. We haven't done it yet, but if we just deliver him a book and then he can make the audio, read the essays himself, whatever, you make it as turnkey as possible. It's not ghostwriting. It's 100% belongs to Eric. And that satisfies the intellectual need for integrity of an academic. And I think a lot of people are like that too.
Right. To that point, it's a real book by the author, by the podcaster. Like Think Like a Billionaire, I consider that just as much a book as all my other books, because I, was involved in editing the transcript. But even if I wasn't, I created the content that resulted in the transcript along with my guests. But many books in life are based on interviews with other people, just organized in a certain way. And Jay, because you were with me every step of the way in there, even doing the audiobook, if you were to add up all the amount of time it took me personally to make the audiobook. So we had someone help edit the transcripts. We obviously didn't do the transcript. We didn't put together the final version that made it into a book. We didn't design the covers. We didn't load it up to the publishing platforms. The main thing I did once we, not counting the podcast, once we decided to make it into a book, how much time was required from me to turn those podcasts into the book Think Like a Billionaire?
You mean including recording, right?
Yeah, I did an intro and outro of each chapter.
I believe it's like 8 to 16 hours, I believe. That's because a lot of time, sit down, you look at the intro, and then you rephrase the intro a little bit. So it's not blindly just read out of the scripts. And then we also have lots of chapters.
I would say closer to the 8 hours, but it might have felt like 16 because we rescheduled a lot.
Yeah, I think 16 in the sense that I actually have to I don't have to put the whole audiobook together. On my side, it's just that I have to attach the intro to the podcast and the outro. Yeah. So those are, let's say, 8 hours of reading and 8 hours of production time.
Yeah. So I'm not involved in the production. I'm just involved in the reading of it.
Reading, yep.
And that's only if I wanted to do an intro. Don't forget, since then we changed the format of the podcast where now I do read an intro before each podcast. Many podcasters don't have to have intros, so they require them basically no hours of work.
Right. Yeah. And then you have links, and then this is also a way for people to, if they don't want to charge, money, if they don't want to do it as a Kindle product for some whatever reason, they can use it to grow their as a valuable commodity to give to their audience and way to collect kind of like-minded people to join together to extract all the resources out of each episode. So I think it's really scratching my own itch, but thanks to this kind of thought you put in my mind that this is something I should do for my own podcast, might as well do it for how many podcasts are there, James?
1.5 million.
Wow.
and again, like I spend about 3 or 4 hours a day reading books, but I very rarely listen to podcasts actually. Mm-hmm. So a lot of great podcasts are not exposed to now, some people are the opposite of me. So in the past month, 68 million people in the US have listened to a podcast. So some people do listen to podcasts. Some people read. So a lot of great podcasters, like, let's say Eric Weinstein, I'd love to read a book by Eric Weinstein,
Yeah.
but I have not really listened to that many of his episodes of his podcast because I just don't do that. It's not the way I consume information.
Right.
But okay, so
Okay.
to summarize the business model, you could approach podcasters and offer to curate, whatever, and make multiple books, and they have to pay nothing, and you do 50-50 revenue split on all the formats that the book is released on. Second revenue model, again, this is just to summarize, is we could do this without their help and just make the book on our own. It'll be a different format. It would be by our publishing company, and it'll be titled something like, the 50 most fantastic things I learned from
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, from Joe Rogan's comedian interviews, or
Right.
or it could be Joe Rogan on comedy, or what I've learned from Joe Rogan on comedy, what I've learned from Joe Rogan on MMA, and what I've learned from Ben Shapiro about economics or whatever. So that's the second business model. The third is they need a book, but they would use it for their own purposes, and then they would just outright pay. And then there's long-term things, which is that you're going to have a backlist. So some books will do better than others. For every publishing company, they really make their profits on their backlist. So whoever still owns, I don't know, War and Peace. I mean, no one owns it now, but whoever really publishes it, that publishing company is probably making most of their money on War and Peace.
Right. Catcher in the Rye. That's the classic one, right?
So you make money from that as well, these long-term things. And then we discussed advertising and affiliate fees and stuff like that. It's a little more speculative, but that could at least be part of the plan.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm really excited about it.
By the way, for everyone listening to this Side Hustle Friday, this kind of started off as something different podcast, but we went into this. Feel free to start your own company doing this. It's $1.5 million podcast. So no matter how big, if Brian and I were to do this, no matter how big we got, we would cover only a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the $1.5 million podcasts. And let's say half of them are quality enough podcasts to produce good enough books to be in a bookstore. And, so there's room for huge competition here, and no harm, no foul.
Right.
So, all right. And that was this week's episode of Side Hustle Fridays. Thanks, Brian, for just riffing that out.
Thanks, James.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.